Hi, readers. It's Lori. Welcome back to my channel, Books, Ink, and Paper. I'm happy that you're here with me today because today I wanted to talk about some potential Women's History Month reads that really stood out to me when I looked at what is available. And I mean, there are a lot available. I tried to choose selections that are not all set in the same kind of time period or around the same topic or subject matter. So we'll see how I did. You can be the judge of that. There's no way I'm going to get to all of these books in the month of March. I would like to choose one at least, but I also can use this list for the rest of this year as well as into next year to be able to discover more about these women who profoundly influenced where we are now and the times that we live in, as well as the lives of many other people. And they were also influenced to a great deal by what was happening in the world at the time and influenced by the challenges of being women, of being mothers, and of being heard or seen or valued for who they were and are. So let's get started. The first one I want to talk about is the three mothers, how the mothers of Martin Luther King Jr., Malcolm X, and James Baldwin shaped a nation. This was written by Anna Malika Tubbs. I hope I'm saying that right. It has received 4.10 stars on Goodreads, and it is her debut. So that to me is pretty powerful. To choose your first nonfiction book about these three characters and their mothers in history is pretty bold and brave, I would say. This one follows Bertus Baldwin, who was James Baldwin's mother and who really encouraged him to write, to use his voice in that way, which of course we all know has resulted in a number of very powerful books. I had the privilege of meeting James Baldwin in person several years ago now. I have a signed copy of one of his books, and I have to admit rather sheepishly that I've never read it. So this also encouraged me, if I were to choose the three mothers, to go back to that box currently that is holding that book and pull it out and see what I think. It also follows Alberta King, who was the mother of Martin Luther King Jr., and how she influenced him to use his voice to really express his faith as well as his important message about humanity and about what could happen and what could be possible if we accepted people differently. And Louise Little was the mother of Malcolm X, and she also helped him to understand how to express himself in a way that would have an impact on people of faith as well as people of color and those people supporting the movement at that time. And they really focused on social justice and equality and used their strength to push their children toward a greater level of greatness that they really saw within them, and how we needed to look at things differently in those times and in that era. I really think that this is powerful. Those women were impacted by the Jim Crow time, the fact that they were Black women. I'm sure that they struggled to be able to support their families and to care for them. Certainly, Black women still don't all have access to some of the things that I have access to. So I think that this is a very important read, and it is following Black History Month and entering into Women's History Month, which for me makes it a priority on the top of my list. The next one I discovered is The Dressmakers of Auschwitz, The True Story of the Women Who Sewed to Survive by Lucy Addington. This one also has a 4.10 rating on Goodreads. And to me, this is a story I have never heard of. And I have read a lot and been to the Holocaust Museum more than once. And I consider myself to be pretty educated. I'm also a member of the World War II Museum, but none of those avenues led me to this story about these women. There were 25 of them, inmates at Auschwitz, and they were pressed into dressmaking service by the Third Reich so that they could create garments for the wealthy women that were married to these men who were in charge of policing and enforcing the laws at the concentration camps. They called this, they were really obviously wealthy people, but they called this studio, if you will, or salon in the place where they would make these dresses, the upper tailoring studio. And they were forced to create these for these women, but to endure all of the persecution that came with being in a Nazi concentration camp. I can't imagine what their experience was like, but I feel like this book gives us an insight into that. And it also follows their interviews. The surviving seamstress is able to, or was able to, articulate to this author their experience and some of the things that happened, the greed, the cruelty, the fear, the hypocrisy. It must have been insurmountable at times, and yet these women continued to do what they were asked to do, no doubt in part to ensure that they would live another day. Incredible, and one that I think would be a powerful read. This is a memoir that I have been noticing since it was released, but in particular, since Viola Davis won a Grammy for her narration. It's called Finding Me by, again, Viola Davis. This follows her journey from Central Falls, Rhode Island to New York, from a little girl who kept running from her past. I'm assuming that some pretty egregious things occurred for her in her life, and finally found a voice to be able to speak out, she says, to a world that didn't see her. What I love about this is she talks a lot about our stories, our beliefs about ourselves, and then what we communicate to other people. And what I love is she says in the synopsis of this book, I wrote this for anyone running through life untethered, desperate, and clawing their way through murky memories, trying to get some form of self-love. I couldn't have summed this up any better myself. And so I definitely want to prioritize Finding Me by Viola Davis. And I think this is the only book that is authored by someone who is famous for being an actor. All That She Carried, The Journey of Ashley's Sack, A Black Family Keepsake by Tia Miles, is a nonfiction work that to me is, the description of it just blew me away as well. So an enslaved woman named Rose gave this sack that was filled with some things that were precious to her to her daughter Ashley. And then later they were separated because Ashley was sold into a different plantation. And after that, decades later, this family continued to pass this around to other women in the family so that it always continued to be filled with my love always, which was what Rose really wanted when she made this little sack. It is currently in the National Museum of African American History and Culture. So you can see it in that display if that is something you choose to do. But to me, this really should speak to the experience of women who were enslaved and the experience of being separated from their families, their children, and the resilience of love, the resilience of hope, and the resilience of the creative spirit that lives in probably all women. An important read, and it currently is on sale on Kindle for $4.99. I don't know how long that will last, but I think it is a relevant piece of work, and it is also rated 3.98 stars on Goodreads. The next one you probably won't be surprised about when I tell you that I am intrigued by Jane Austen at Home by Lucy Worsley. This one is an exploration of all of the places that Jane Austen lived and found to be important in her life, or spent at least a little bit of time in. This one was published in 2017, and it did win a Goodreads Choice Award for Best History and Biography at that time. I don't know why it didn't kind of come into my awareness at that point, but I am interested in this spanning of her life in all of these different places, a little bit more about the things and the places that mattered most to her, the rooms that she was particularly fond of in each one of these places, because she was they rented a home in Winchester, they were in Godmersham Park, they were in very different places during her lifetime. Also, a little bit about her desire to preserve her marital freedom. She had 5 marriage prospects, and she refused to take any of them as a husband, and really was committed to settling for her own Mr. Darcy, which to me speaks volumes about this successful author in a time where women were not necessarily perceived as beings who should be authors, nor should they necessarily be single. I really think that this will be a grand read, and I'm not sure what time of the year would be best suited to read this, but I really think you can't go wrong with Jane Austen, at least in my opinion. 4.09 stars on Goodreads, and again, a favorite, a Goodreads Choice Award winner several years ago. Okay, here we go. I am particularly invested in women's access to medical care and to being heard by physicians. I have discovered myself that I do not always feel heard, nor do I necessarily feel that my ability to make decisions about my own medical care is valued by some of the members of the medical profession. So this one, Women in White Coats, How the First Women Doctors Changed the World of Medicine by Olivia Campbell, sounds like something we all need. It is a 3.73 rating on Goodreads, and it follows 3 women in the early 1800s who recognized that women were dying much more often because of the barriers that existed and the treatable diseases that they did not receive medical care for. Now, this could have been because they were impacted by their ability to be married, because obviously women who were married did get priority to some degree, but also because women weren't a priority and men were meant to be the backbone of society at that time. So 3 women, Elizabeth Blackwell, Elizabeth Garrett Anderson, and Sophia Jex Blake, went for a meaningful career in the medical field and fought for their place in this male-dominated culture so that they could become physicians and that they could treat women and support women who needed access to medical care. And not only did they do that through, I can't imagine the number of obstacles in their way, but they brought forward women-run hospitals and teaching colleges for the first time ever for women who wanted to care for other women. How they shaped what we have now as a medical system, even though it has some flaws and challenges, is incredible to me. And how they persevered through such a difficult field and such a prejudice against women becoming doctors. Even still today, there exists a lot of prejudice in systems. And of course, we're trying to overcome that at all times, but really they had to fight for their right to be able to be educated and licensed and practice as physicians. So hurdle after hurdle after hurdle, which again, I can just be so grateful to Elizabeth, both of the Elizabeths and Sophia, for really standing up for the rights and the medical care that all women should have access to and should be able to receive without stress. The next one, it came out in 2020, and I have no idea how I missed this, because 2020, I feel like I had a little bit more time and quiet time really to reflect and to research books. And I read a lot in 2020, but it came out in January. So perhaps the pre-COVID lists were a little bit less prevalent for me at that time. But this one is called Red Comet, The Short Life and Blazing Art of Sylvia Plath. This is by Heather Clark, and it has a Goodreads rating of 4.60, which, as you know, is a very high rating for Goodreads. This one follows the life of Sylvia Plath, which wasn't easy. I have heard before about her life and her growing up in a very difficult childhood and her life. This does examine her father, who was a scientist, the way that she began writing as a young person, her psychiatric treatment, her life with her widowed mother, her growing up in the mid 20th century with the atomic bomb and with the Holocaust happening all around her, and her difficulty with the mental health industry and with their ability to really support her. It also goes into her Cambridge years and her meeting Ted Hughes and their relationship and how that changed some things for us over time, that in the area of literature and poetry, that is really important. I can't imagine a more compassionate portrayal of Sylvia Plath than one that is written by someone who really cared about telling her full and whole story. It really does help us to realize that women like Sylvia Plath created an opportunity for women poets throughout history since that time. She opened doors for women who write poetry, that whether you like her poetry or not, those doors would not be opened if not for Sylvia Plath. So I present that one to you as a possibility. And I do think that it is a way of understanding a tragic ending to a very powerful life. And last, but certainly not least, and the highest rated book on this list is Know My Name by Chanel Miller. This was given 4.72 stars on Goodreads, and it has so many ratings. Over almost 160,000 people have rated this book on Goodreads. I marked this to read a long time ago, and I'm somewhat ashamed to say that I haven't gotten to it yet. It was also a Goodreads Choice Award for Best Memoir and Autobiography in 2019. It was nominated. She did not win that title, but I can't imagine why. I think one of the reasons this is a difficult read for me is that I was a victim of sexual assault as a young person as well. And I worked with victims of sexual assault and other abuse for a very long time. And it is hard for me sometimes to even get back to these reads, even though I feel fully supported and I feel like a lot of time has passed and I have had a lot of resource over time. However, this story is so important and so powerful that I do think this year is the year for me to read Know My Name. You first heard about Chanel Miller because her name was Emily Doe, and she was a victim of a predator named Brock Turner, who was sentenced to just 6 months in jail after he was found guilty of sexually assaulting her on the Stanford campus. He was seen sexually assaulting Chanel Miller. There were witnesses. Her victim impact statement was publicly posted on BuzzFeed, where it went viral, and over 11 million people read it within 4 days. It was translated into other languages. It was read on the floor of a congressional session, and it inspired changes in the laws in California, which also resulted in recalling that judge that supported this mediocre, ridiculous sentence of a sex offender. So many people came forward after Chanel Miller told her story and went public, which she did not have to do. They told their stories of their own experiences of sexual assault, in many cases for the first time. So she tells her story of the trauma and of the way that this lifted her up by being able to tell her story in her own words. There were eyewitnesses, mind you, and yet people didn't believe her. And the most important people didn't believe her. But those of us who have watched Chanel, who have heard her speak, and who have read her book, even though I'm not one of those people, know that this will change the way we think, not only about sexual assault, but about the way that victims are treated and what is acceptable and unacceptable about that, and how we can make changes so that this never has to happen to another victim of sexual assault. I don't know that that will change in my lifetime, but I feel like thanks to people like Chanel Miller, the possibility is higher. The lives of these women and the stories that are being told about them are real, are in many cases so difficult and impossible for many of us to fathom. The tenacity, the hope and resilience, the treatment of so many of these women is something that all of us need to consider with a perspective of appreciation, gratitude, and inspiration for ways in which we can use our lives, our stories, and our experiences and our voices to be able to impact the lives of women all over the world. So I thank you for watching this video today. I thank you for considering what you would like to read next as a part of this list of important books about women, memoirs, and historical accounts about women. I'd love to hear which one of these resonate with you, or if you've read some of them, I would love to hear that too, and let me know what you thought in the comments below. And I hope that you'll share this video with others that you know that might be interested in some of these works and might be interested in learning more about what I think are some very powerful and impacting women. So thank you again for joining me. Thank you for listening. And as always, happy reading. Bye.